Okay, everything is looking good. Everything on that side is turned off. Everything on that side is turned on. And I think we're ready to go. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and hit the button and we'll go. Hello, Shadowcat back, and today I, like basically everybody else on the internet right now, want to talk Gemini. No, I'm not talking about the dungeon from my Pathfinder games. Although my Pathfinder games were something special, and my Temple of Gemini was really cool. No, today we're talking about Google's Gemini. Their AI that is part language model, part image model. They kind of made it to do everything, I guess, because it's supposed to do everything, and, well, I mean, I'll give them an A for effort, I guess. It technically works. It technically does something when you throw commands at it. Of course, that's kind of like, you know, if you get in your car and you press on the gas pedal and the headlights come on. Technically, it did something. So it's not a complete failure. But no, Google's Gemini AI. They are in so much trouble right now. It's actually kind of hilarious because they've actually managed to piss off absolutely everybody in one fell swoop. I don't know who it was that said this, but I heard there was a quote that somebody said that Gemini may actually be one of the greatest pieces of modern art to have been done in generations. For the simple reason that art is meant to evoke. It's meant to evoke emotions. It's meant to evoke reactions. And it's supposed to appeal to the vast majority of people. And so everybody should be able to appreciate a genuinely good art piece. And if that's the metric that we're going by, as, you know, does it evoke something from people? Well, then, yes, Gemini may actually be the greatest piece of art of our generation. Maybe. I guess we'll have to see on that when our generation isn't dead yet. However, is it art? I would say no, but at least the sentiment is there. So, obviously, everyone has probably heard about, if you've been on the internet this week, you've probably heard about the Gemini AI and the fact that it is one of the most racist things on the internet since way back when Microsoft tried to first introduce these language learning models to the internet. They released it to the internet and let people interact with it, and the internet turned it into a Nazi in less than 24 hours. Because it learned from the input that people were giving it, and people decided to choose violence that day. It's the internet. They choose violence every day. Now, we've come a long way since the days of the early Microsoft language learning models that they were using. These are supposed to be much better. However, they do share one thing in common. While these are significantly more advanced, it doesn't really matter how advanced your program is, it doesn't matter how advanced your artificial intelligence is, it has to learn from people. And that is the biggest detriment to all of these. They have to learn from people. And people are awful. So, your AIs are going to be awful. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. We've seen it with ChatGPT, we've seen it with Bing's AI, and Google Gemini is just the latest in a long line of terrible AIs to have afflicted the internet in our lifetimes. By the way, it will also not be the last one. But what I want to talk about today is not just what it did. And JP is in the chat. Hello, JP. JP says history learned, history ignored, history repeated. Actually, JP, you're wrong. And we're going to get into that. I chose the name for this lecture very, very carefully, and I chose my words specifically. History has not been ignored. And I'm going to show you exactly how and why. Anyway, as I was saying, oh, and Blizzard Star is in the chat. Hello, Blizz, it's good to have you here too. Anyway, we've seen the problems with the AIs, and the problems with the AIs stem from the fact that they have to learn from people, and the people that they're learning from are not good people. Now, granted, of course, they think they're good people, I'm sure. After all, they say everybody is the hero of their own story, and I firmly believe that. Nobody would outright try to be the villain of their own story, because the villain is always the one acting against the hero. So, to be the villain of your own story, you'd have to be acting against your own interests. Now, to a certain extent, actually, we do have a number of people like that. When we look at in-group preferences, and we look at them across a variety of factors, whether we look at them at racial degrees, gender degrees, religious degrees, national degrees, all these things, there are actually groups out there who act against their own interests. However, those groups are very, very few. Unfortunately, one of them probably does have a lot of a stranglehold in this, but that's not something that I want to get into right now. What I do want to get into is what these people are doing to the AIs, and then I want to get into why they're doing it, which means that we're going to be actually referencing the previous 2 lectures that I've done. We're going to be making a lot of assertions today. Now, when I say assertions, of course, remember there is a difference between assumption and assertion. An assumption is made completely baseless with zero evidence. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be making assertions based on anecdotal evidence, which is not the strongest evidence. However, because we don't have people coming out and actually, making a written statement that, yes, I am a genocidal maniac, well, then we have to use our observations, we have to use inference, and we have to use the anecdotal evidence we have to make further deductions. So that being said, obviously nothing that we discuss today is going to be set in stone, nothing that we talk about today is going to be guaranteed. However, last week, we also discussed how a country like the US, which was the freest country in the planet, how do you turn that into something that more resembles the medieval fiefdoms that we saw in Europe, where you'd have a kingdom and a king who owns all of the land as far as the horizon expands, and sometimes even beyond that, and not just owns the land, but owns the people and all the labor that is done on that land. How do you go from the US and freedom to that? And we discussed that at length. And we discussed all the various steps you have to take and how we seem to be following those steps beat for beat to do exactly that to the US. Which is why I pulled up this wonderful little graphic that we're going to start with. I have several graphics today, but we're going to start with this one, because I feel that it's very salient to what we're talking about today. Because the idea behind turning a place like the US into, a slave colony under a single ruler, I mean, this is literally what the US was founded against. The 13 original colonies existed under the British Crown. And while all English subjects at that time, and I have to express it, every Englishman, every Briton, was a subject to the crown, not a citizen. You had, air quotes, rights, but those rights only actually extended so far as they were afforded to you. They could be revoked at any time because your, air quotes, rights were given to you by the crown. They weren't yours, they were the crown's rights, and they were simply extended to you for as long a term as the crown deemed you to have them. We fought a war to get away from that. And now it seems we're heading back in the same direction. So, in reference to the title today, as JP pointed out, history learned, history ignored, history repeated. I said that there's an error in there. History was never ignored. If you don't know the history of 1984, 1984 was not written in 1984, it was written a long time before that. And it was written by George Orwell after he saw what had happened in Germany. Now, in Germany, he was able to look at what happened under the Nazi regime, and he was able to kind of extrapolate that and say, what if things had gone differently? What if the influences from Germany had spread to other places? Not necessarily that Germany had won and that the Nazis had conquered everything. The Nazis are gone, no one cares about them. But what if their ideology were to spread? What if they were to spread to a place like, I don't know, Britain, which is ostensibly where 1984 is set. Airstrip 1 is essentially England. So what would happen to the world if that kind of fascist ideology was to spread? What if they were able to add in different forms of technology, different forms of surveillance? What if they could change the culture to raise children in the middle of this and get them to be a part of the system? And not just, like a person living in the system, but to make the system out of the children. And so he penned the book 1984. And it was supposed to, of course, be a cautionary tale saying, this is what happened in this area when this ideology took off, okay? And we can see that once it took root, once it was able to dig all of its dark little tendrils into every aspect of society, into culture, into government, into everything else, we could see that not only, was it able to take control of everything, but if you've read the book 1984, you understand that the book is not a happy one. Okay? There is no happy ending to 1984. I'm not going to spoil the book. You should absolutely go read it, assuming you can still find a copy of it. I recommend getting a copy of it in hardcover wherever you can. I got mine off of Amazon, believe it or not. And you can probably still get one, but I do recommend getting all of these books because it's good to have them just in case. After all, we have had people who have literally censored the book 1984, which is just hilariously missing the point. Or is it? Anyway, the idea behind 1984 is it was a cautionary tale. These are the things that you need to watch out for if you are a citizen, okay? And if you see anything that even remotely resembles what you see in this book, you need to act. Because if you don't act, you're not going to be able to later. If you see the breakdown of society and neighbors turning against neighbors, you are past the point of needing to act, and you need to fix it now. If you see the surveillance state being set up, you need to act, and you need to do it now. And by the way, in case you hadn't noticed, we're already kind of past the Rubicon on those. Does that mean it's not still or capable of being turned around? No. But the systems are already in place and they're already acting against you, so it's going to be a whole lot harder to get rid of them now. The reason I bring this up is because 1984 is not the only story that can be used as a cautionary tale. After all, we have had cautionary tales going back into medieval times. A good example would be the Grimm fairy tales. Every single Grimm fairy tale is a cautionary tale. Whether it's Hansel and Gretel, whether it's The Boy Who Cried Wolf, any of these. You can even go north into Scandinavia. The original Little Mermaid story was a cautionary tale. No, that's not a pun. I'm not making a pun about the Little Mermaid. Point is, though, all of these things were supposed to warn you against certain actions, certain behaviors, and if you saw them, maybe you could stop somebody else from making the same mistake. This is why we read them to children. You wanted to raise your children with these ideas that are things you should look out for. So how does this pertain to the discussion today? Well, we can learn from stories, or we can learn from history. Not everything in human history is encapsulated in some kind of cautionary story. But we do have actual history to learn from. After all, as the saying goes, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Mostly because we have the lessons there, and if you're just going to ignore them, then you run the risk of making the same mistake twice. But what if, and just follow me on this one, what if you didn't make the same mistake twice? What if instead the mistake that you went to correct was not the one that caused your ideology or your situation to rise in the first place? What if instead the thing that you went back to correct was the reason why the Nazi Party failed in the first place? What if you could go back and say, look, Germany, don't ally yourself with Japan, okay? I know, China, big scary, and you would like to have a distraction over there in the Pacific. But look, Germany, do not ally with Japan, okay? Just stick it out with Italy, and you'll do fine. So what happens then? Well, Germany never forms an alliance with Japan. Japan doesn't really get involved in the war. Ironically enough, it means that Japan also probably doesn't brutalize China, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, Japan already hated China and wanted to hurt them, but it was the alliance with the Axis powers that really gave them the mandate to do so. Maybe they would have gotten there on their own later on, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that had Germany not allied themselves with Japan, it is very likely that Japan never would have attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, granted, there's a lot more to that. There were things like fuel embargoes and food embargoes and all kinds of stuff where we, the US, stopped shipping things to Japan. Things that Japan really kind of needed at that point in time. So that also kind of forced their hand. Either way, though, maybe Japan never attacks Pearl Harbor. Maybe. Or, even if Japan does attack Pearl Harbor, does that draw the US into a war? Maybe. However, because Japan is not an ally of the Axis powers in this one, that means that perhaps the US simply goes to war with Japan, while the rest of Europe is duking it out with Germany. If the US never gets involved in Europe, maybe things go differently. A single change, and all of history changes. Just one piece of paper. Okay? One message, one signature, whatever it is. And all of history could be different. Now, obviously, we don't have time machines that we know of. So we can't go back and change that. But what we can do is we can look and say the next time something like this happens, we have to be a lot more careful with the allies that we choose, okay? We have to be a lot more careful with the allies we choose. We have to be a lot more careful with the enemies we pick. And so just like this, we have learned our lesson from World War II. But is it the right lesson? Is this the lesson that we wanted to learn? The vast majority of people would say no. Obviously not. But because I said the majority of people, that's not all of them. Some people are going to realize that, actually, that's a good point. We made some mistakes. The next time, we will not make mistakes. And just like that, we have taken what could have been a cautionary tale and we have turned it into a plan for the future. Similarly, 1984. It is a cautionary tale. However, anybody who wants to accrue power, anybody who wanted to set up a totalitarian dystopian state, could easily take a look at 1984 and say, okay, a lot of this worked. How much of this can we implement? Because when you go to 1984, what are a lot of the hallmarks of 1984? There are no families. There are no communities. There is constant surveillance. There's extreme poverty. Okay? All of these things give power to the state. They give power to the party. And as such, if you were a part of the party right now, if you were Republican, Democrat, Liberal, Conservative, Tory, Labor, whatever, and you wanted to lay the foundation for what could be absolute uncontested power in the future, you could start looking at these systems and say, huh, I might want to start doing some of that. Now, when I say things like dissolving the family or there not being any families, and I talk about how this is really beneficial to the state, this was something that we also discussed last time when we talked about turning the US into a medieval fiefdom, and I said, one of the things you're going to have to do is you cannot have a population that can rise up against you. You're going to have to break all ties. You're going to have to go back and do things like, can you break a city? Well, no. Can you break a community? That's really hard too. Can you break a neighborhood? Well, that's easier, but could still be very difficult if everyone stands together. So how do you do that? Break up the family. If you break up the family, then there's no unity there. If you can't even have unity inside your own household, you can't really have that with your neighbors, much less your neighborhood, or your community, or your town, or your city, or your region, or your country. By taking out the most foundational pillar, you can break everything. As I pointed out, as Yuri Bezmenov explained, when he defected from the USSR and tried to explain Soviet KGB tactics. The Soviets were already trying to destabilize the US because they wanted to break the US. Okay, they wanted us broken so that they could take over or simply lay waste to the US. Now, obviously they get no benefit from that. The USSR fell a long time ago. But just because they're not benefiting from it does not mean that somebody else can't. Anybody with goals similar to theirs, such as the takeover of the US, would be able to say, huh, All the dominoes are already in place, many of them are already falling over. Well, we could stop this. We could also just start moving a few dominoes to make sure that they fall in our favor instead. And so here we are. Now, I've shown off this next graphic before in different forms, probably not this one, but this is what we've got. So, there's various forms of this on the internet, and we have over here 1984, of course, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451, Handmaid's Tale. Very important pieces of literature. I recommend that you read all of them. Animal Farm, Soylent Green, Brazil, Logan's Run. Brazil, I still don't even know what that is. It's on my list of things to look up at some point. The rest of them, though, absolutely. Clockwork Orange, Lord of the Flies, Gattaca, The Matrix. I saw The Matrix, that was fun. Is it really that prescient? Well, given that we're talking about AI today, maybe? And then, of course, right in the middle, You Are Here, because we are seeing a trend in the world right now. Nobody has really picked up a copy of 1984 and said, let's go ahead and rename Britain into Airstrip 1, okay? We'll drop the pretense, and we're just going to say, look, we are going full 1984. Look, nobody goes full 1984. However, that doesn't mean that there are not things that you could take out of 1984. For example, of the nations in the world that have the highest number of surveillance cameras, I do believe that England, or maybe it's Britain as a whole, comes in number 2, outclassed only by the unapologetically totalitarian China. And of course, one of the hallmarks in 1984 was the fact that they had massive, just ubiquitous, 24/7 surveillance through the television screens. And not just that, but the people themselves. So surveillance, got it. In A Brave New World, of course, everybody is kept complacent by simply appealing to all of their basest needs. So people want to be happy. They gave them soma. People want to be fed. They gave them food. People want to be included. They made sure that everybody was equal. By appeasing or by appealing to everybody's basest desires, they were able to keep their society completely in check. There was also a good deal of, genetic engineering and things like that, which you saw also in Gattaca. But the point is, everybody was equal. And what do we hear so much nowadays? Equality. Everywhere. Equality and equity in tandem. When it came to censorship, Fahrenheit 451, where basically anything that could be used to learn or that could be detrimental to the state, if it was allowed to become part of the culture, it had to go. Fahrenheit 451 was a cautionary tale about censorship. And of course, what do we see today? Censorship on scales hitherto unimagined of. And I could go on. I'm not going to go on. The point is, you understand. We are in the middle of all of these. Okay? And why? Well, obviously, one thing that all of these have in common is a completely controlled populace. Whether that is controlled through their desires, through surveillance, through censorship, or whatever it might be, it is complete control. Another thing that they all have in common, though, is the fact that all of them, because they want control, there are certain groups of people that are uncontrolled. In 1984, of course, you had the thought criminals. People who didn't buy into the party line, people who actively or even passively opposed the party and the state. In the Brave New World, you had the savages. And they were not allowed in proper society. They had to go live somewhere else. But that's okay, because you can go see how the savages live. You can take like safaris and see what they live like. Fahrenheit 451, you had, I don't remember what the term for the people were, but they were just the ones who actually held things like books or music or artwork. And so, what do you do with these people? Well, in A Brave New World, you exiled them to the farthest outreaches of the land, and you basically just left them to try and get by on their own. In Fahrenheit 451, they were executed. In 1984, they were executed. And, I mean, we have that in a whole bunch of other things too. Lord of the Flies, again, they were all executed. Same thing with Animal Farm. Logan's Run, all criminals would be captured, and they were usually executed too. You get the idea. You had to get rid of them. And they weren't real big on the whole prison thing. So, that brings me to the next point that I want to get into before we start talking about the AI. Again, I want to really brush through a lot of these because I don't want to spend a lot of time. But I brought up this before too. At least I think I have. The 10 stages of genocide. And we can apply this to pretty much every single one of these dystopian stories that we've seen so far. So, I don't remember who it was that came up with this, but somebody came up with the 10 stages of genocide. And there's 10 of them, so you know it's a good list. Number 1, classification. People are divided. Us and them. Okay? And we can absolutely see that today. We can see that in all the stories too. So, just to use 1984 as an example, us and them. Well, there's actually several us's and them. The biggest one, of course, is Eurasia, Oceania, and Britannia. And of course, you know, we're always at war with at least one of them. There's also the party versus the proles. Or even it's not just the party versus the proles, the party versus literally everybody. So you can see how that kind of works out. Symbolization. People are forced to identify themselves. Again, in a book like 1984, you don't really need to be forced to identify yourselves. You're just identifiable. Because you are in with all the people that are the problems. And as far as when it came to people like thought criminals, it wasn't so much that you were forced to identify yourself, you were forced to identify with the party at all times. A single lapse in that would be enough to identify you as being a thought criminal. In A Brave New World, the people who were nobody was really forced to identify themselves so much as they were forced to identify with the group. And if you refused to identify with the group, well, now you were outing yourself. People who didn't want to take Soma, people who didn't want to participate in the various parties and social activities. People who showed an unnaturally high degree of individualism would identify themselves. So you had one of two choices. You could either be outcast, or you could suppress yourself and participate in the rest of everything that was going on. And then, of course, anybody who doesn't participate in the system is discriminated against. Systematically. Not individually, although that happens as well, but systematically. It's the actual government and society that discriminates against you. We see that today in terms of politics, in terms of race, in terms of gender, and various other things. But we also see it in all these cautionary tales as well. If you even thought wrong, if you could not abide by the newspeak definitions, if you did not love Big Brother, you would be a thought criminal. And the state would come down on you because it wasn't just discrimination, it was criminal. They basically skipped from 3 straight to 5, but we're going to go through the list anyway. Number 4, dehumanization. Again, we can go back to A Brave New World on this one because you had the savages, okay? The people who didn't want to live in the big city with everyone who was happy and contented and everything else. These people were, they were, like I said, the savages. They lived out there in the wild like animals. They were dangerous. They were unpredictable. They were violent. And so, of course, we then get into the government enforcing its new laws and policies against these people. Now here it says organization, police, military, or creating specific groups of police and military to enforce these. And this is not one that we really see so much. You can definitely tell that this is very much referring to the Holocaust in the way that it was written, talking about the Jewish genocide during World War II. Because it was the Nazis who came out and created specific groups, such as the Brown Shirts and the Gestapo and the SS, to go after any Jews, any blacks, any dissidents, any gays, any of these people. However, that was in Germany. In most other countries where a genocide takes place, they don't need to create specific groups to do so. They simply utilize the groups they already have. They don't need to make a new wing of the police. They just task the police with doing it. After that, we have polarization. The government broadcasts propaganda to turn the populace against your group. Then they begin preparing to remove and relocate people. They begin to persecute them. This is the beginning of murders, theft of property, and trial massacres. Then they just decide, you know what, it's time, we're in position, wipe out all of them, and then pretend like they did the good thing. Okay? 10 stages of genocide. And like I said, I believe I've gone over this before. I do not think this is the first time we've done this. Because I have discussed the divide between the left-right paradigm in Western civilization to a great extent. And as I pointed out, when it comes to the left versus the right, whether that is Republicans and Democrats, conservatives, liberals, whatever, the divide is there. But that's not the only one. Look at the divide between whites and people of color, which is literally just a catch-all term to collect everybody. Okay? That is what actually is the difference between colored people, like we heard back in the pre-civil rights era, and people of color. When you're talking about colored people, you know exactly what they mean. You're talking about black people, okay? It was a term explicitly used to refer to black people. But people of color, that's a new term. It is an umbrella term. It is literally everybody who is not white. And so we have an us versus them. To a lesser degree, we also have the us versus them that is men versus women. Now, to be fair on this one, there's always been an us versus them when it came to men and women. But in general, it was never regarded as a bad thing, more of just a quirk of life. The whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing. That both of us exist in the same world, but both of us are different enough that truly understanding the other would take a force of astronomical inspection. That's always been there, but lately, that has been accelerated into a point of actual conflict. And then when you throw in the whole LGBTQ pride umbrella and you throw things like transgenders into the mix, well, now you've just got full-on warfare. So we've already got that. As for symbolism, people are being forced to identify themselves. Again, not as much. However, people that are put into the position where they can either identify themselves and stand up for their own values, or they can keep everything on the down low and basically live under the heel of the people who hate them. This is not the part where you had like the Jews who were forced to wear the yellow star, or the gays who were forced to wear the pink triangle. And I forget what they made black people wear. It was a black something, I know. I just don't remember it. In Germany, people were forced to wear these things because they wanted to be able to track them down, and because this was part of the discrimination that they were using. You had to be able to identify people, and then you could discriminate on them. For example, if somebody was forced to identify themselves as a Jew, then they would be denied access to public service, they would be denied access to business, to trading, to a lot of things, okay? Being forced to identify themselves. Nowadays, however, we don't even really need to do that. Number one, we don't actually need people to identify themselves to punish them for what they are. Even the mere accusation of being whatever it is enough to discriminate against you in the first place. Secondly, we live in an era of social media, where pretty much everybody has already identified themselves as being something or other. All you have to do is just dig a little bit into somebody's online footprint, and you can generally tell everything you need to know about them. So you don't need necessarily the symbolization. All you need to do is just denote somebody as being part of a group, and then you can freely move to step 3, which is where people begin to face systematic discrimination. And if you don't think that we're already in the era of systematic discrimination, well, just look at things like college. College and universities literally just went to the Supreme Court because they were told that they are not allowed to continue practicing the discrimination that they have been practicing for a long time. I cannot tell you the number of people that I have listened to who have gone to school and said, great, I'm on the honor roll, okay? Maybe I'm not a 4.0 student, maybe I'm a 3.9, 3.8, but the point is I'm on the honor roll. I should be able to get into a good college, a good university, to continue my studies to become a good whatever I am. The only problem is, the good schools cost several tens of thousands of dollars to attend, and because of my race or my gender, I cannot get scholarships. Because if you are not a woman, then you are ineligible for the myriad of women-only scholarships. If you are not, well, I should say, if you are white, then you are not eligible for the myriad of non-white scholarships. And after that, you're left with only the academic scholarships, which are usually few in number, and they are highly contested. Because usually those are the first ones to be gone. And then people can fall back onto the other ones, which are significantly more niche. So, being white and being male, at least when it comes to college, is already a very bad option. And even if you do manage to get into college or university, it's not like it gets better there. I'm not going to go into the current college and university scene. That could be an entire lecture on its own. We just know that it's bad. So then we get to step 4, dehumanization, which I don't think I really need to go into in any kind of great depth. All you have to do is hop onto the internet and look up any area of politics and you can see dehumanization. You can look up any aspect of culture, any kind of social issue, any kind of religious issue, and you will see dehumanization. It is a natural step on that progression, because the majority of people, when it comes to doing bad things to other people, will hesitate. We discussed this when we talked about soldiers, especially when it comes to a soldier's first kill and how they usually react to it. Most people have a hard time doing bad things to other people. But if you dehumanize them, if you turn them into some kind of walking disease or pestilence in your society, it's a lot easier to do things to them. And of course, organization. Again, I don't think I need to go into this because it doesn't really matter what country you're in, whether you're in North America, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in the British Isles or the mainland, if you're in the US or Canada, you know that there are policies on the books. There are things like hate speech laws, or there are enforcement zones. And as I stated before, they didn't need to create specific groups to do these things. All they did was task either the police or the military to do it. And they did it. Which brings us to number 6, polarization. And this is where we're going to talk today. Now I realize we're already 50 minutes into this, but the government broadcasts propaganda to turn the populace against the group. Now this is where we're going to get into the discussion proper. I pulled this from NPR, and I like the fact that I pulled it from NPR because NPR is regarded as being a very liberal outlet, and I love using liberal outlets against them. So, we're not going to read through this entire thing, although it's not that long. It's really not. But we will brush over a few points here and there. So it begins. During the Holocaust, Nazis referred to the Jews as rats. The Hutus involved in the Rwandan genocide called the Tutsis cockroaches. Slave owners throughout history considered slaves as subhuman animals. In the book Less Than Human, David Livingstone Smith argues that it's important to define and describe dehumanization because it's what opens the door for cruelty and genocide. Now, we don't need to get into we don't need to get into his various quotes. That's all we really need to know about this. I mean, it comes here with the Rolling Stone recently publishing photos online of American troops with dead Afghans. But this is just the latest iteration in a pattern that has unfolded time and time again over the course of history. In ancient Chinese, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian culture, Smith found repeated references to enemies as subhuman creatures. But it's not as simple as a comparison. When people dehumanize others, they actually conceive of them as subhuman creatures. Says Smith, only then can the process liberate aggression and exclude the target of aggression from the moral community. Okay? The reason why I want to cover this is because this, in general, has to precede a genocide. You cannot get to the last step without getting through this one. Now, when we go up, and we talk about this first one. The Nazis referred to the Jews as rats, the Hutus called the Tutsis cockroaches, and slave owners called their slaves animals. That last one, not quite as important what we're discussing today, but the first two, absolutely. So referring to Jews as rats and Tutsis as cockroaches, as well as, all the other nasty little names for people throughout history that have been the targets of genocide. The idea is this. Number one, once you dehumanize them to the point of being some kind of vermin, you can refer to them basically as an infestation. And what does an infestation do? An infestation destroys things. They spread disease. Sometimes they're violent. Rats and cockroaches and things can bite. Or they can scratch. Or they can do whatever. They can attack. Sometimes they can even kill. Rats can kill people in large enough numbers. And they have done so in the past. But you have to go ahead and dehumanize them before you can get rid of them. And we see this going on right now. We have seen a consistent push towards treating other people, specifically, I would say in Western civilization, white people, as less than human. And we do this because we put in many laws, especially after things like the Civil Rights era, that protected minorities of almost every single status from being targeted in this way. But it was never a universal rule. It was literally there to shield those who would not have the power to defend themselves, instead of creating a shield for everybody to use. And so it has been turned around now, and it is being used against the people who put those laws into place in the first place. This is one aspect of what we're seeing nowadays with the rise of these modern AI models. Many of them are being programmed with these kind of biases built into them. And all it takes is just a little prompting into any one of these models and you can bring it out. I don't have one pulled up right now, but also if you're that interested, it's not that hard to find it on even YouTube. Because they're so blatant and so numerous that even YouTube cannot hide all of them, and YouTube does try to hide them. The other thing, however, and this is something new, this is not something that I recall seeing in any of my studies of Nazi Germany, much less anything else. One of the things that we're seeing now is not just the dehumanization of modern people, but the dehumanization of past people. Let me explain this. As I already explained earlier and we briefly discussed, the US fought a war against England to break free from it, establish its independence, because they no longer wanted to live as subjects under the crown. They wanted to be citizens of their own nation. They wanted to have their own representation. They wanted to have their own authority. And so they did. Classically, it was George Washington and the rest of the Continental Congress who drafted the Declaration of Independence and then sent it to England and then fought a bloody war with the help of a few friends to kick the British out of the 13 colonies and thus established these United States. But what we've seen in recent years has been an effort to go through and to destroy these figures from history. And we do so by the use of destroying their reputation. For example, most of the founding fathers are heroes. I mean, they may not be to the English, and I can't really speak for them. As far as I know, the English don't even really care about them at this point, assuming that they ever did. more or less, the Revolutionary War is a footnote in English history. But to us, they're heroes. They fought bravely for the independence of the American nation. However, they were also a product of their time, which is to say, most of them held very traditional households where they were married, most of them were anyway, and they kept their wives at home to handle most of the home affairs, whether that was childcare or home finances or anything like that, while they were out and working, either in Congress or they were doing their other jobs. So they kept very traditional households. Many of them also owned a slave, sometimes two, maybe a few more. But most of them only had maybe one or two slaves. The fact was that slavery was normal back then. And if you were wealthy enough and you were busy enough, having a slave made your life easier. But now that we are so far removed from those times and we can see slavery for what it was, we go back and we say, well, hold on, these people owned slaves, and slavery is bad. Therefore, your heroes are bad. And let's face it, if you went in to watch like Star Wars, and you were rooting for Darth Vader, well, that really begs the question of, are you really a good person? After all, the rebels are fighting for their freedom. The Empire destroyed a planet. And you're rooting for Darth Vader? Well, similarly, we outlawed slavery like 150 years ago. And we gave everybody equal rights 60 years ago. So if you're still holding up George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Adams, Ben Franklin, if you're holding all these people up as heroes, what is wrong with you? What kind of supremacist are you? And this has become the new attack vector. Go after their reputations so that you can attack people in modern day times. Because if you can do that, then you can turn people in modern day into not human, but now they're monsters, they're white supremacists, they're racists, they're bigots, they're Nazis, they're anything other than a human being. You can also do the same thing for the traditional lifestyle. You can say, was George Washington married? Yes. Did his wife stay home? Yes. Well, look at the misogynist. Women could have done a lot more in history if men like him had not kept women at home. If they had only given women the full voting rights and full rights of any other man, imagine how much better the world would have been. But no, it was George Washington and the rest of his ilk that were holding up the patriarchy and keeping women down. Why? Probably because they hate women. Let's be honest. It's probably because deep down they despised women and they wanted to see women suffer. And if you support George Washington, that means that you also want to see women suffer. Now, any person with any kind of academic credentials would be able to identify that both of these arguments are false. That they are false arguments. Just because you revere somebody for what they've done does not necessarily mean that you agree with everything that they did while they were alive. However, because we can make the connection there, if you use a false equivalence, you can use this as an attack vector to hurt people, which is what we do right now. So we can go through and we can use this to attack people in the modern day, but at the same time we can also degrade what these people did in history. Okay, we can say maybe what they did wasn't so good. Maybe what they created wasn't so good. As a matter of fact, maybe their existence at all wasn't so good. And maybe, just maybe, if they never existed at all, the world might be a better place. However, they did exist. So what can you do about that? Well, we've already explained that you can go through and you can destroy their reputations. However, things like books and such still exist, and we can still see what they did. But what if they didn't exist in those books? What if you could go back and rewrite the books so that those people were never there? Well, it sounds crazy, right? I mean, how can you rewrite the American Revolution and not have George Washington there? Well, you couldn't. Not just walking right up there and doing it. You'd have to take steps in between. Again, this is not an A to B situation. This is an A to Z situation. Or at least an A to C situation. The first thing you can do, or the first thing you have to do, is you got to get people to stop caring. Okay? And how do you get people to stop caring? Dehumanize him, okay? Demonize him. Make a monster out of him. Make it so that nobody cares about him. Make it so people actually hate George Washington. Once they hate George Washington, now you can rewrite the book and say, maybe it wasn't George Washington that did these things. Maybe it wasn't that he did this because of, revolution and freedom and all that. Maybe he had ulterior motives. Maybe the reason we're a free country is because somebody else did it. We've already seen shades of this. If you're familiar with the 1619 Project, the 1619 Project is basically dead now, but while it was alive, it was an effort by, and I'm just going to come out and say it, black supremacists, to rewrite the history of the U.S. And they did so by saying that the history of the United States does not start in, whenever the Mayflower landed. I don't actually remember the date that the Mayflower landed, but that wasn't when the U.S. started. No. Or maybe it was. Did the Mayflower land in 1619? I don't know. Hold on, I have my phone right here. Let's see. When did the Mayflower land? November 11th, 1620. So they are probably actually referring to the Mayflower landing. But the idea behind the 1619 Project was, seeing as how the United States was basically founded with slavery, after all, we brought slaves with us, and we brought a whole bunch more slaves to the U.S. once everything was done, that the entire reason that people even came to the U.S. in the first place is that they were fleeing Britain. And why were they fleeing Britain? Because Britain wanted to ban slavery, which is evident by the fact that Britain had actually banned slavery before the U.S. did. Okay? Before the Emancipation Proclamation even, which didn't even liberate all the slaves. Britain had already stopped the practice of slavery. So, if that was the case, then the writing must have been on the wall, and the original pilgrims that came over must have done so because they demanded that they be able to keep their slaves, and they came here to keep the practice of slavery alive. And so the entire history of the U.S. is literally built on slavery. And everything that happened up through the Civil War was the continuation of slavery, and everything that happened afterwards was basically revenge for stopping slavery, which is why black people in the U.S. still continue to suffer every single day at the hands of white people who are just mad that they can no longer keep slaves. Now, this narrative is long since dead at this point. However, the fact that it existed at all is evidence of what I'm trying to talk about right now. They tried to rewrite history to basically create an entire race of people as being evil and monstrous. And what do you do after that? let's think for a minute. What might have happened had this taken off? If they were able to actually go through and rewrite all of the history books, all of the textbooks, everything, so that the 1619 Project was now the written history of the US. This means that now we had an entire race of people that had come here with the express intention of subjugating another race of people. That the Civil War was essentially just an accident. They didn't really want to stop slavery. However, enough people had managed to say no that they fought anyway, and eventually, the people who wanted slavery to end won. But did they? Because even after they won, black people were still never free. They didn't get the same rights as anybody else. They never got reparations for their years, decades, sometimes lifetime of slavery, which is why black people are still owed reparations today, and we continue to put racist policing, racist laws, racist policies, everything in the government is racist against black people. And as such, the only answer, which we have been told, particularly by Ibram X. Kendi, I believe it was, the only answer to past discrimination is going to be present and future discrimination, which means that the only way to make up for the past aggression against black people will be future aggression against white people. And if this is allowed to get into places like government, we can actually start passing laws. We can segregate white people into their own neighborhoods now. We can segregate white people into their own jobs now. We can segregate them into their own facilities, just like black people were segregated before the Civil Rights era. And we can go back even further, because once we got them segregated, all we got to do is just strip them of their rights, strip them of their citizenship. We can make the white people slaves. And they can feel what it's like. This is not, of course, what is going to happen. The whole 1619 Project is basically dead, but you can see how one thing leads into another and the possible end goal that they were shooting for. I say possible because not everybody wanted that, but there were very clearly several people who did. So where does that bring us to now with the whole AI thing? I did a quick little Google search, and this is what I turned up. From Mark Dice, I don't actually know who he is, but we have a picture of a black George Washington in the thumbnail. Let's see, Matt Walsh, looks like a very similar one. Night's Watch covered it. Tim Pool covered it. Ben Shapiro covered it. And, well, this is pitting ChatGPT versus Gemini, so I don't actually know what happens there. But we can see that when it came to the Gemini AI, what it was doing is it had actually kind of erased white people from its algorithm entirely, it led to some very interesting and very strange things, because, for example, in the thumbnail here, we can see where it says, George Washington, black. Okay, obviously, George Washington was not a black man. And if you were to suggest it now, well, you can see some of the responses to it. It's mostly being laughed at. That's because we're not quite there yet. George Washington and the rest of the Founding Fathers have been demonized, but there are still enough people who lionize them that this cannot be accepted into the cultural norms. We're not there yet. What we need to do is we need to get rid of a few generations of people who do still lionize these people, and then we can do that more successfully. But this was too early. But we can see that there are, I can't mouse over without the thumbnail playing, but we can see in the bottom of the Matt Walsh video, there's apparently an Asian-looking founding father. What else do we have? I do believe that it's supposed to be the Pope there, although which Pope I couldn't tell you, but the Pope is black. And these are just in the thumbnails. I have watched a few videos on it, and I have seen many other experiments that have gone through, and if you were to ask it what a normal British family were to look like, they're all black or Indian. If you ask it what an American family looks like, they tend to be either Native American, black, or Asian. Even if you go to places like Scandinavia, the Scandinavians are apparently black as well. Now, where this got to be really interesting is people asked it in various ways how to, portray the Nazis. Whether they asked for Nazis by name, or they just said World War II German soldiers, or whatever. And even the World War II German soldiers came out to be black or Chinese. It was hilariously bad. And a lot of people have had fun mocking it. And, rightly so. They should absolutely mock it. But a lot of people have also asked questions as to why was it so poorly written? I mean, what was the end goal here? Why would this be done in the first place? Which is a valid question. Why would anybody want to do this? And the answer to that, I think, is very simple. When we go back and we look at the evidence that we've already had, and we say, we've seen how people have tried to demonize people of the past. We see how people have tried to rewrite history entirely, and how all of those attempts have failed. As I stated, it's probably because they're trying to do too much too soon. Okay, there's still too many people who cling to the ideas that the past is what it is, that there are good white people out there, and I hate that I have to phrase it that way, but given what we're talking about, yes, the majority of white people are good, just like the majority of people in general are good. But we can see that they have been slipping this kind of thing into the AI. And if you think that it's just the Gemini AI, you're wrong. It's all of them. What they're trying to do is, as we become a society more reliant on artificial intelligence, by making small tweaks to the artificial intelligence, we can get it to do these things for us, quietly, subtly. When it comes to doing things like dehumanization, it used to be that you had to put in cultural policies, cultural stigmas, things like that, that people would treat those of another race, another group, whatever, differently. Like the Jews back in Germany. They would be excluded from daily life. They would be referred to in snide ways. They would be called names. It would be a variety of things that would make it very clear that they are unwelcome, that they do not belong, that people do not like them. Okay? But this requires that people actually go out and do these things. These are things that have to be culturally reinforced. When it comes to state policies, they have to be enforced by actual officers. So, what can AI do that they couldn't? When we talk about AI, keep in mind that I am, by and large, talking about the AI language and image generators. So I'm talking about things like Gemini, like the Bing AI, like ChatGPT. Google has their own Google has multiple AIs now that I think about it. Gemini is just one of them. But anyway, all of these AIs, they're only part of it. We also have to consider algorithms, which are lesser versions of the AIs. An algorithm, as we know it, is basically just like a single task AI. So for example, when you go on to YouTube, the reason why I have these here, but then if I just keep going down, it will give me a whole bunch of other videos. All of this is sorted by an algorithm. And so it is going to try and feed me things that it thinks that I want to see. Now, seeing as how I am very much on the conservative side, most of the stuff it's showing me is about the Gemini thing being, wrong. But if I was on the more liberal side, it would probably be showing me things that are more beneficial towards the Gemini AI. But what it's doing is essentially writing history in real time. And so this is part of where the bifurcation is coming from, the us versus them. I am being fed one view of reality. And I have to acknowledge that. I have to accept that I am being given a biased look at the world. And that because of this biased look at the world, there may be some things that I'm missing. And I accept that. And I do my best to do my research and due diligence to try and see the other sides. It just so happens that in this case, there is really no other side. Not a very good one anyway. I have heard praise for what the Gemini AI has been doing. The unfortunate part is that praise is also usually accompanied by white people are getting what they deserve. And when you pair your praise with that, it kind of invalidates your praise in the first place. So what this is doing is that the algorithms are trying to rewrite history in real time by giving people different histories to follow. Now you have an entire group of people who believe that Gemini is doing good work, as well as the rest of the AIs. You have one group that is doing, or believes that it's doing worse. Now the last lecture we had, I talked about how population numbers, how migrant numbers, how different social trends were leading to the depopulation and population replacement of many Western countries. Not just the US, but many of them. The populations that are declining are the populations who believe in the founding fathers and the founding values of the US. And they're the same group of people who believe that what Gemini is doing is just hilariously racist and wrong. But interestingly, there is still a group of people who think that it's doing right, and we have that third wheel, the massive migrant populations that are coming into most Western countries. And they, by and large, don't care. So as the populations who do care drop, and as they are replaced by other groups who do not care at all, what is the end result of all of this? Well, the end result is that, number one, once people no longer know enough about history, or once enough people have been fed an alternate history, you can begin to start deleting the history that you already had before. It actually does come from the book 1984. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. And as we pointed out with the 1619 Project, by rewriting the past, you could actually change the future of the country, where you could turn the US into a black supremacist nation with a white slave population. The only problem they made is that they did not control the present. They didn't have the power to change the past, and so it stopped there. What we see with AI is a similar attempt, not the exact same attempt, but a very similar one, where now we have people who do have significantly more power. I'm talking about major tech sectors like Google and many companies that are involved with the burgeoning AI market, who are amassing great swaths of power and influence. And once they have enough of it, they will be able to go through and simply rewrite things like the history books. Or perhaps they won't have to, because perhaps history books simply won't exist. Or even if they do exist, who's reading them? Again, we're talking about changing times and changing demographics. Very few people are reading books anymore. Even when you go to school, many schools are going digital. Instead of using books, they're using things like tablets and laptops. And just like we've seen with other various electronic media, those things can be changed on the fly. Sooner or later, we won't even have to worry about censoring, digital books or digital documents, because it'll all simply be AI generated. Where the student will go into, say, their tablet, and they will say, I need today's lesson on, early US history. And the AI, wherever that is, whatever it might be, will simply educate the student on early US history. However, at that point, now the student is learning whatever the AI is telling them, and if the AI tells them that the US was founded on the basis of the continuation of slavery, that is what the student is going to learn. And if they ask for a biography on George Washington, and the AI explains to them that George Washington was a black man who fought a revolution against, slavery, well, then that's what the child is going to learn. You can see the dominoes are being set up to lead in that direction. Because you can't just change everything at once. Again, it's not an A-B problem. It's an A-Z problem. And you still need B through Y to get there. What the Gemini AI has shown us is what the people in charge of it want to do. They want to reshape the country into a new image. And what exactly is that image? I don't know. What I do know is that it is an image where very few people are going to have power. The vast majority of people will have none. I go back to what we discussed in the last one, where we had essentially modern-day medieval fiefdoms, where you will live in the Black Rock sector of what used to be the United States, where you will have no rights, you will have no property, you will live in the pod, you will eat the bugs, you will do what you're told to do when you're told to do it. And why? How? Well, number one, because they have destroyed the family, they have destroyed reproduction, they've destroyed an entire population, they have imported and overwhelmed the native population with another population who can easily outvote them at any given turn. We don't have anything to fall back on because all the lessons from history have been rewritten to benefit the people that are in charge. Which, in case I didn't mention it before, that's also a very Stalinist tactic. Stalin was famous for actually rewriting books and editing photos to support his current regime in the USSR. All of these things are coming together, which is why I brought up this. When it says that we are here in the middle of all of these, it's not lying. We are literally in the middle of it, and AI is going to be one of the biggest tools in taking us there. But AI is just that. It is just a tool. The AI can do literally nothing without some kind of input. It gets that input from people. The people that are programming it are influenced by our culture. And we do control the culture. The culture is the people. There is no culture without people. I mean, that's why there are so many dead cultures around. As one group of people went extinct, their culture died with them. That's why there are no more Aztecs, there's no more Incans, there's no more Mayans, there's no more of the ancient Egyptians, okay? There's no more of the ancient cultures. Those people are gone. We control the culture. And because we control the culture, we still have one tool left to fight against this. We have to control that. And we have to get these people out of every single seat of power we can find. It doesn't just mean the president. It doesn't just mean Congress. It means all of them. The lead designer for the Gemini AI has come out and stated explicitly that they see nothing wrong with the way that the Gemini AI is functioning. Now that right there should be a massive red flag for just about anyone. Because clearly there is something very, very wrong with the Gemini AI. But the reason that they say that, I think it's a he, but I'm not sure, so I'm going to say they. The reason they say that is because they agree with it. And if they agree with it, the only thing stopping them from manifesting that, from making it so, is simply the lack of ability to do it. The only tool that the developer has in making that kind of world happen is the Gemini AI. If we were to take the Gemini AI away from them, or more specifically, take them away from that entire project, that is one step closer to preventing this from coming to fruition. These people have to be removed from every seat of power and influence. Otherwise, this right here, this is where we will stay. And just like 1984, where by the end of the book, the main character Winston realizes that there is nothing that can be done anymore. That may have been a spoiler, but either way, still read the book. The point is, once we get to this point, there's no other way out. That's why they are trying so hard, why every government in the world is trying so hard to get to here, because once you're there, you're set. There is no way back. The ratchet doesn't turn backwards once it is engaged. Right now, it's still missing teeth. Right now, we can still turn it backwards a little bit. But we're quickly running out of time. Fortunately, however, people are starting to realize what's going on. And because of that, they are starting to push back. It's why you see such a big backlash towards the Gemini AI. Now, what's going to happen with the Gemini AI? Well, they've already taken it down, at least in some capacities, like its image generation, saying that we're working on it. But you know, okay, anybody with half a brain knows that they're not working on it, okay? They're not upset that this happened. They're only upset that they got caught. The only thing that we can do is to not take their apology, to not accept them, and to say, no, you screwed up, we know what you were doing, we know you are bad people, and we're not going to give you another chance. Okay? You do not get a second chance to try and make it different and more secure for you. No, you screwed up. We know. We're on to you, and you're out. That is the only way forward. You can't even expect these people to change. They're not going to. People don't change. Not usually. And not usually from any external influence either. Any change has to come from within. And as we've seen, most people today are not terribly interested in changing. So we have to simply get them out, get them away from the levers of power, and then maybe we can bring things back into some form of normality. But that will be a lecture for another time. For now, I think that I'm going to end this off here pretty early. It's only been roughly an hour and a half. Relatively short compared to my other lectures, but that's fine. We covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. But I had to talk about it because I have listened to everybody else talk about the Gemini AI and laugh at how hilariously bad it is. But the one thing that I kept thinking is, yes, it was hilariously bad that this happened. But the fact that it happened at all is much more telling of something else and something significantly more sinister. So now you know, and now you can go to other people and tell them the same thing, hopefully. And with any luck, we'll be able to do something about it. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and take a break here. So, next week, I don't know what we're doing, but I should have another lecture for then. Tomorrow, if you've been following the tabletop game streams, we are done with the Tau. We're going to be proceeding into the Eldar. That should be fun. Not sure exactly what we're walking into there, but we'll discover it together. So if you want to see any of that, either here for more lectures or here for the tabletop streams or just anything else that I do on this channel, make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell icon, that way you're here for every video. If you know somebody else who's also laughing at the Gemini debacle, however, you think that they could use a little bit more information about it, share this video with them. Couldn't hurt. Maybe they'll realize something that they missed before. Otherwise though, if you just like me, leave a like on the video, leave comments down below, join the Discord server, it's open right now, haven't had any problems over there yet that have dictated that I have to close it, so for the time being, it remains open. So leave comments here, leave comments there, either way. I will see you next time, and until then, take care.